The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to today's SQL Sentry webinar on Windows, SSIS, and SSRS monitoring. My name is Scott Fallon. I'm one of the pre-sales engineers here at SQL Sentry. And today we're going to be covering some things that I usually don't get to cover due to time restrictions in as much detail as I'd like in my normal demo presentation. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the add-on products or other products that we have in the SQL Sentry lineup, and just some potentially not as noticeable features of the event manager side of our tool set. Also, I do want to mention a couple of things I have on this slide here. Keep in mind that you can download a free trial of SQL Sentry and try it out in your environment. The link is here on the slide. You can also take advantage of the team blogs page, which is all product related information, and then our SQL Performance blog page, which is not only a forum site but also has a number of bloggers from Aaron Bertrand and Kevin Klein who work for us, to some guest bloggers like Paul Randall and Kimberly Tripp from SQL Skills, and provides a lot of great educational content on SQL Server topics, primarily geared toward the performance side of the spectrum. And if you have any questions, please feel free to either put them in the chat or the questions pane here in GoToMeeting, or email them to us at salesengineering@sqlsentry.net. And the same goes for if you'd like to schedule a one-on-one online demo for more information on any of the things that we cover today, or even any of the things that we don't. Just send me an email at that address and I'll be happy to get it set up. So let's hop over into my demo environment here. And just to give you a little bit of background for those who may not be familiar with our tools, these are tools that were originally developed out of an internal need that we had when we started out, not as a software company, but as a SQL Server hosting company. And after developing these tools for our internal use, we quickly realized that there was probably going to be a commercial market for these. And in the years since, this has grown into our primary line of business. But the SQL Sentry tools really are software made by DBAs for DBAs. And just a quick architectural overview to start us off. We have three components to SQL Sentry. There's the client application, which is what I have pulled up on my screen right now. That client connects to the second component, which is the SQL Sentry database, and that's a standard SQL Server database. That can go on anything 2005 SP2 or higher. We do recommend at least standard edition for that. And the last component is the SQL Sentry monitoring service. And that is a lightweight Windows service that uses a polling type architecture to go out and get the data from all the monitored servers and stream that data back to the SQL Sentry database. Both the clients and the monitoring services can be installed in multiples with no tie to licensing. Clients, so you can roll those out to multiple users. Monitoring services to ease things like monitoring servers in different physical locations or in different domains, or just for load balancing and failover capabilities. And within this one unified architecture, we have a number of different products. They're broadly grouped into two families: Performance Advisor and Event Manager. Performance Advisor is the deep dive performance monitoring and analysis side of the tool. That is available for SQL Server, for Windows, and for analysis services. And then we have one add-on product within that family called Fragmentation Manager, which is an add-on for Performance Advisor for SQL Server that allows you to do not only index fragmentation and history tracking, but automated index maintenance from within the tool. Then the Event Manager side of the product is a more overview side of the tool. Event Manager does calendar views of activity on your servers. It does alerting. It does scheduled event automation. And Event Manager is available for SQL Server, which includes monitoring of SQL Server Agent, reporting services, and integration services. Event Manager is also available for Windows to monitor the Windows Event Log and Windows Task Scheduler. For SharePoint to monitor SharePoint configuration databases to track timer job activity on them. And for Oracle to monitor and automate Oracle jobs. Today we're going to be covering a little bit of Performance Advisor for Windows, a little bit of Performance Advisor for SQL Server, and a lot of Event Manager for Windows and for SQL Server, because that gives us complete coverage of the Windows and SSIS and SSRS environments. And just because I'm going to be jumping around quite a bit, I'd like to also cover just a little bit of my my demo environment and where things are. This is a portable system, so we do make some compromises here, and do understand that there are a couple of things that are going to be a little obviously contrived, but we have to make some sacrifices to make these machines portable. But the host is actually SSDemo 8. This is a virtual environment. SSDemo 8 is where my is not only the physical machine, but it's also where I have a SQL Server instance hosting my SQL Sentry database and my load generation. And then I have a number of other VMs here. The two London and Redmond machines are Hyper-V virtual machines. And most of what we do today is going to be focused on looking at SSDemo 8 and looking at London SRV07, which is sort of my dumping ground VM. It's where we've put SharePoint, it's where we put another SQL instance, it's where we put my SQL 01 instance, which is where reporting services is deployed. So we'll be focusing a lot on that instance. And we'll go ahead and start out on the Event Manager side of the tool, and I'll start out with my global view here. Let me find a little bit of activity. That may be more activity than we need. So Event Manager focuses on these Outlook-style calendar views of activity on your servers. And within any of these views, I'm using my global view just as a start to give you an intro as to where everything is and how these things lay out. So I can tell what each type of object is by the glyph in the top left-hand corner. So I have a SQL agent job here. I have long-running queries as top SQL. I have blocking events. I have deadlock events. Now, all three of those last three types, top SQL, blocking, and deadlock, all come from Performance Advisor for SQL Server. So those are Performance Advisor's events that have been integrated into the Event Manager calendar. I also have Analysis Services commands from Performance Advisor for Analysis Services. I have, in this one, I also have a log entry. In this case, it's a Windows event log entry from the application log. I have a backup failure that got logged there. That's a small subset of the total types of objects we might see. A couple things we're not seeing are reporting services reports. We might also see DTS packages, Oracle jobs, SharePoint timer jobs, Windows scheduled tasks, SQL agent alerts, and SQL agent log entries. All of those types of objects can be integrated into these calendars. And with any calendar object, I can tell what the runtime of the object was by the blue runtime bar as it relates to the time ruler here on the left. And then in many of these, I have red and green status bars. A red bar indicates a failure or an error. A green bar indicates a successful completion of a scheduled event. I might also see a black bar for something that was canceled, an orange bar for something that's currently running, or a yellow bar for a warning level log entry. And all of those color codes are customizable. You can set them to whatever you need. And with any of these objects, a single click on them gives me all of the runtime details. You already saw me do that with that event log entry, but I can also do that on a job that failed here. And this one is, I see very quickly, it is running an SSIS package. I have this package start indicator here. So if I wanted to drill further down into that to find out about the SSIS, first, I would have to have SSIS logging turned on, either from within the package by building the logging into the SSIS package itself, or by adding it retroactively through Event Manager. If I right-click on a job that has an SSIS package in it, I can click on the SSIS logging options menu item. And in this case, my logging level is already set to enabled because I've done that previously. But by default, it would be disabled. When you switch this to enabled or enabled verbose, what happens is SQL Sentry edits that package or edits that job step to change it from SSIS to command exec, and then it can add in the right switches in the command line to get that logging information. It's really nice to be able to go ahead and backfill that logging wherever you need it. I typically don't go through and enable this for every job that has an SSIS step in it. I just go in and enable it either for the really high priority ones or the ones that are having problems. And I usually use the enabled level of logging. Verbose tends to get truncated because of its length and is often just more trouble than it's worth. So once I've done that, or for any multi-step job, even if it's not an SSIS job, I can click on the bottom right-hand corner of that job, which gives me a little step callout window. I'll expand that a little. And now I can see the job steps and their status. Again, red bars will indicate a failed status. But here where I have the SSIS, I can drill in once more and get my little step detail showing me the package logging information. So the package started successfully, but then immediately encountered an error on step 1 where we tried to do a log backup on a database in simple mode. And that continues through the package. So I can very easily drill in and find out what happened. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we can monitor SSIS from a service standpoint when we get into Performance Advisor for Windows. I'm not quite ready to do that just yet because I want to cover a little bit about reporting services monitoring. And for that, I need to go to a different time slice. Now, if I'm only interested in one particular subset of these calendar objects, for example, reporting services reports, I can go to that instance and drill in and just double click on the root node here in the navigator tree and get a reporting services specific calendar. And we can see here I ran a whole bunch of reports, and these are actually the SQL Sentry reports that are built in right here that I've got deployed to reporting services on my SQL 01 instance here. And we can see that I had a bunch of reports that I ran, and they all ran successfully. All of these bars are green. And when I click on any of the reports, I get a lot of information on how that report ran. I have everything from where it spent time, to byte and row counts, to status, to who ran it, who created it, runtime statistics, all of that's in here. And let me drill in a little closer on one little area. So we can see all these reports. We can see the report names as we drill in. They've all got friendly names that you don't have to see the GUIDs. If there's a subscription, we'll see that. And in this case, these were manual executions there in the run type, but we would see the subscribed ones or automated ones as well. Now, one of the things I often encounter with reporting services and have frequently encountered in customer environments is basically this, where in a self-service reporting environment, whether it's scheduled executions or just individually run reports, the reports all tend to get run at similar times of day, especially with scheduled reports. For example, in a customer environment, I had a customer tell me that their reports were running really long every day, and we went and looked, and all of their reports had been scheduled to run at 8 a.m. So they had, at 8 a.m., it looked about like this. There was just a row of reports across the calendar. Now, the first question I asked is, do these all need to run exactly at 8? And the answer to, in most cases, I think for all but 2, was no, because the reports only had to be current as of the close of the last business day. So we were able to just, by seeing that, distribute those reports across a wider period of time. And I had started that just from a single report. It was from one of the reports that they were having particular problems with. And I had gone to that report and looked at the runtime graphing feature. And I had been on a weekly, I don't have a good example for a week, so I'm just going to go to an hour. A weekly view, and I saw that on Saturday and Sunday these reports ran in less than 30 seconds, but the average was closer to 30 minutes because Monday through Friday they always ran for 30 minutes or more. So we were able to look at Saturday and Sunday and see that only a couple of reports were running at that time 7 days a week, where loads were running during Monday through Friday. So by rescheduling those, we got all of those reports from running as long as 30 minutes because they were having all kinds of blocking problems and just resource utilization problems. We were able to see what was causing those to run long was just simply contention, and reschedule those subscriptions over the prior 2 hours and resolve that issue. Now, even in these runtime graphs, if I mouse over one of these, I can see the values for that report run. And the important thing here in the runtime graph is I can see the parameters. So I can see here that I ran this one with a start date of 1/1/2012 to current on my global server performance report, where this one that ran quicker was a shorter time period. So I was retrieving less data. It makes sense that this ran faster here than it did the one I was looking at previously. So just by looking at that parameters list in the tooltip, it's very easy to identify those things. Also here we can, with a right click, you can enable performance monitoring on a report. So if you have a report that is very high impact, by doing this you can then use the add performance counters option to tie any counter in the perfmon library to that report, and we will pull that counter as that report runs, and not only keep a history of it in relation to that report, but it allows you to set alerts on that. So if I have a report that's very I/O intensive that I want to, let's say, kill the report if that I/O threshold, let's say 30 milliseconds per write or per read, is met, I can have that set up as an automated alert here in SQL Sentry. So I could say, on threshold max, kill task. So you can build some safeguards like that into your environment and use our automated alerting and response system to do anything from very invasive automatically fixing the problem to just simply notifying you or logging the event. So you have quite a bit of flexibility to respond to conditions like that. And that doesn't just apply to reports. I could have done the same thing with that SSIS job. So another thing that we can do is look at how these impacted performance. So these reports, while they run from London SRV07, they actually pull data from SSDemo 8, where my SQL Sentry repository lives. So we've got to look at two different servers from a performance standpoint. I've actually already got this up here. So a little earlier this morning, I ran a whole bunch of reports. And here is the Performance Advisor dashboard for London SRV07, and we've got it focused on the SQL 01 instance. So my SQL Server counters over here on the right are specific to that instance, where the Windows counters are the server as a whole. And that's important because I have multiple instances here. So there's SQL 01, there's the default instance, there's my SharePoint instance, there's the actual SharePoint application itself, the Windows file cache, and any other used memory on the server. And those color codes are used not only as here in the system memory, but in CPU and network as well. So we can see that SQL 01 accounted for a lot of network traffic, just as we'd expect for reporting that's going to be pulling data over the network. So all of those overlays are very helpful, and this is a combined view. This is what happens when you get both Performance Advisor for SQL Server and Performance Advisor for Windows watching the same machine. If we didn't have Performance Advisor for Windows, we wouldn't have the overlay, for example, for SharePoint here. And we wouldn't have the Processes tab, which I'll touch on here in a minute. If we didn't have Performance Advisor for SQL Server, we wouldn't have the SQL Server half of this dashboard, nor would we have all these other tabs that are a deeper dive into the relational engine performance and what's running against the server. So we had this period of activity here, and if we go back to, if we look at the Event Manager calendar for that around 10:30, we see this is where I ran all those reports. And if we wanted to take one of them as an example, I can even jump to the Performance Advisor dashboard for that time and see where that report ran. So again, it's right here. And I can zoom back in and get a little more resolution. I was on an hour time slice in Event Manager, so it jumped me to a broader view. But what I want to see here is this bright green color indicates that this was activity, other CPU activity, not associated with the SQL instance itself. My suspicion would be that this is the reporting services executable itself running. So let's see what happens when we jump to processes with that selected. So that narrows my time range to that 1026 to 1029 range. And we see here that by far my most active thing was reporting services and Internet Explorer. I've got a bunch of IE windows open on that server where I was running the reports. But we see loads and loads of, especially of read activity from reporting services there, just as we would expect. So it's very nice to add the Performance Advisor for Windows and have this ability to go not only look live, which I could do through Task Manager or Process Explorer, but back in time at what the running processes were and what their resource utilization was at any point in time that we have history for. So we can very easily identify that reporting services was the big consumer there. Well, that explains a little bit, but maybe I also had problems on the database side. Maybe the reason that a report ran long wasn't on this server, because although the server spiked a bit, it certainly wasn't at any time really looking like it was struggling to keep up. My weights were low. My network traffic wasn't insane. My disk latency was nice and low. We still had CPU room to spare. So chances are, if I had a bottleneck, it wasn't here. So the next place I need to know to look is here on SSDemo 8. So here's about the same time slice, and here's that right around 1028. We had activity going on. So what we can do is see for that same period of time that we had mostly SQL Server activity going on, a fair amount of CPU, fair amount of I/O, although our reads were really pretty quick. Writes were a bit slower, as they tend to be on the SQL Sentry database because it's a very write-intensive workload overall. And we had a corresponding spike in the weights to that same period of time when those reports were ran. And our weights at that time, if we click on one of these spikes and go back to sample mode, we see that we did have some CPU activity, and most of our weights were latch weights and CX packet weights, since we were parallelizing a lot of those reports. So we can see that here easily. We can see what data files and log files we had latency to or from. At this particular point in time, it was more just Windows stuff going on. Our SQL Server files actually look pretty good. And that's this disks 2 and 3 hold VHDs for the other SQL servers in this virtual environment, where the stuff on SSDemo 8 that the SQL Server is running against is all on an SSD, so it's pretty quick. So let's go back to history here, and let's go verify that this really is the same. This really is reporting services at this time. So let's jump to Top SQL for this period. And here we see everything that ran at this time. Again, that same 1026 to 1029 time slice that broke my default collection threshold, which is a 5-second runtime. and we'll see if I turn off my totals mode, which was rolling a couple things up, I have 2 big CPU consumers during that time. And we see that the host on both of those was London SRV07, and the application was SQL Sentry client, and they were reporting services. They were these report procs. And we can see those parameter values here. So we can very easily see that those were what ran during that time. If I want to go in even more detail, we can jump back to the dashboard from one of them and map its runtime onto the dashboard. So we can see this particular report accounted for this last big spike. There were probably quite a few other reports that didn't make my 5-second collection threshold. If we remember back here on the calendar, I ran a whole bunch here in this time range, and quite a few of them were in the, like this one, in the 2-second duration, 4-second duration, well, that one made it at 12, but another 2 seconds. So there is some things that I'm not seeing with my currently configured collection threshold. If I really was trying to get all of them, I could adjust that accordingly. But I just want to get the heavy hitters most of the time, and these were certainly the 2 biggest. So if I wanted to see how these ran in a little more detail, we can click on the View button here. And that gives us an execution plan that was cached at the time that query executed. So we can see exactly how this ran. So there was a little bit of a mismatch between estimated and actual rows, but not enough to make me really too concerned. I doubt the plan would have been different at 15 rows. And we can also see that this report actually wasn't one that was using parallelism. We don't have any parallel operators here. And most of our work was concentrated in this index seek, the join, and a spool operation. So we can see exactly what was happening, and I could go a lot deeper into this execution plan, but we'll save that for another presentation. Make sure if you haven't already that you check out the query tuning and analysis presentations that Kevin Klein and Aaron Bertrand have been doing on this same webinar series. But we can see how this plan worked out for each of these reports, and if there was an issue with the plan, we could take a look at that. By that same token, we can see here that these parameters were exactly the same because I just reran the report. But if there was a parameter sniffing issue, we would be able to do a plan comparison between these two. So lots of flexibility in how you do analysis on this. If you have the full package, if you can watch the Windows level, the SQL Server level, and on the Event Manager side, the SQL Server instance as well. So another place that this the Windows level monitoring comes in very handy is with VM heavy environments, like this one. So what I can do is, instead of opening Performance Advisor like we've been doing so far on an individual instance, I can open Performance Advisor either at a global level or at a group level. I'm going to use the group level because this main group that I have here, is host and all the guests. West is another environment entirely, so I don't want to mix that in. So let's open Performance Advisor at the group level. And this is, while not as flashy as our individual instance dashboard or individual server dashboard, it is very useful. So here I've got my host and all my guests, and I can easily see how, for example, memory is distributed to these guests. And you can see that we still have a very large amount of memory that is reserved for the SQL instance on the host. If I drill in a step further, we'll see my SQL instance here is using 8 gigs here on SSDemo 8. And I've got about 6 farmed out to the VMs of the total 16. The rest is getting consumed by the operating system, reporting services, SSIS, and other stuff that's running here on SSDemo 8. And on any of these, we can drill in one step further and also see, if we do have a SQL Server instance, which I typically would not on my VM host. So this is one of the areas where I have made some compromises for ease of transit of this demo system and put a SQL instance on there because I didn't really have any other place to put it. And I didn't want to pay I didn't want to have another license associated with this machine. So here we can see the SQL Server counters for any of the SQL instances. And here where I have more than one, we can drill in and see the individual instances and could go in and see, like for example, the SQL 01, how is it running? In this case, fine, because I'm not running any reports right now. And from any of these, I can right-click and I can show the Windows processes for that machine, or I can open an Event Manager calendar or Performance Advisor dashboard for that server. So it's a very easy way to drill down from an overview into a machine that might be having a problem. You can see I have a red highlight here. In this case, that's bubbling up from the SQL Server level, where I've got high write latency here on this server. So to go a step further, open Performance Advisor, and we can drill in and see where that write latency is taking place. It's taking place on my F drive primarily, and it looks like it's primarily affecting files 3 and 4 of TempDB. So very easy to get from that overview level down into details, and from details into history mode as needed. So a couple other things to talk about are the alerting capabilities of the tool. We mentioned that briefly a minute ago with the performance counter-based alerting on a reporting services report, but there's quite a bit more available around on the Windows side and on the SSIS and SSRS side. So on the Windows side, you have two Windows specific alerts from Event Manager for Windows. Well, two categories. You have the Windows event log alerts where we can tell it what type of event we want to look for and then fire any one of these actions. We'll set one up as a send email so you can see what you do to configure these. So you have this Windows event log event, and by default, it's actually going to fire on any event, and that's not really what we generally want to do. So let's go ahead and say I want to send these to the DBAs. But I want to filter this. I want to say the level equals only critical. Or maybe I want to build in critical or error for an email where I might want to log or set a different rule set on the fault tolerance, for example. So I may want to have critical or error sent every time it happens, but I may have warnings set to let me know if there's 3 warnings in an hour, or if it was something that was runtime based, let me know after this condition has persisted for more than 30 seconds. Obviously, I'm not going to have that on a log entry. I might also want to suppress some of these during certain periods of time. So during nightly maintenance, don't fire these alerts. Or I only really care about these Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, so fire the alerts that happen in that window. And these windows look just like a SQL agent schedule window. Same interface. Nice and easy to lay out. And then for Windows tasks, we can provide notifications or response to any of these different categories. So started, completed, success, or failure, specific output contents. These output content matches string match against what would be the entire tooltip here on the Event Manager calendar. So for example, on this integrity check job, anything in that gray box would fire this. So I can, and generally I'm looking for something in the last step output or something like that. but that gives you quite a bit of capability to customize those. But now with the new condition filtering that we looked at, like on the Windows event log, you have quite a bit more ability to filter any of these alerts and not necessarily just do it on the output content matching. Then you have the runtime threshold max and min, and you can specify what your runtime thresholds are, whether that is a percentage of average duration or a hard threshold. Because there may be something that I want to know as a general rule. Let me know if anything that runs for more than 250% of its average, because at that point it might be hung. But I may have a couple of Windows tasks or SQL agent jobs that spin up, check for something to do, and then if there's nothing to do, they just end right then and there and maybe run for no more than 1 second. But then if they have work to do, say it's an ETL process, it may work for 2 or 3 hours. Well, that runtime threshold max of 250% of average is never going to work for that job. So I would set on that specific job or task, I would set a runtime threshold that I'm concerned at. So maybe let me know if it runs for more than 3 hours. And any of these alerts can be set at any level of this navigator hierarchy. So I can set a Windows task alert up here at the global node, on a group of servers, on a server itself, on a specific Windows task or group of tasks. So I can scale those however I need. And then on the reporting services side with alerts, it's the same way. So we have a very similar set of alerts for reporting services: started, completed, success and failure, and runtime thresholds. So the alerting behavior is going to be the same there. And then, of course, we have the fail-safe type alerts for things like SQL Server or Windows connections going on or offline. And also within SQL Sentry, one of the sets of alerts that we have are alerts that are generated on behaviors of our monitoring service. But these can be really helpful with monitoring reporting services or Windows Task Scheduler, because we don't specifically monitor if they go on or offline. But if these monitor threads in our monitoring service start reporting errors, that is a really good indication that one of those services may be hung or offline. So these can be an early warning on that as well. And the last thing I wanted to mention is one of the really cool features of Event Manager is that you can do event chains. And this event chaining was really originally developed for SQL Server agent jobs. Like this chain is, for example, is all agent jobs. And this gives me the ability to automate workflows of scheduled events. And think of it like a giant SSIS package that can act across multiple servers and is managed by SQL Sentry out of existing or newly created jobs and tasks. But I'm not limited to just SQL agent jobs on this. So I can create a chain that is either all Windows tasks, we'll just get a couple here, or I can mix and match. I could also include SQL Server agent jobs in this. And if I had monitored Oracle servers in this environment, I could even build in Oracle jobs if I wanted to. I don't have any, so I won't be doing that. But I've just dragged in a few jobs, and what I do here is, lay them out in the order I want, and then define the workflow connections between them, just like I would creating an SSIS package. So on this one, on completion, I want this to run two things in parallel. I want it to run demo job, and I want it to run disk space checker regardless of how it finishes. And then I want to create a multiple dependency to go do this defrag only if these complete. If this one completes, because I just want this to already be done when I do the defrag. I don't care if it succeeds or fails from a standpoint of doing the defrag. So we'll do that one as completed and go to defrag. And in this one, I want to make sure I have enough space before I do this and start moving things around. So I want this one to have to be successful before we go to the defrag. But then if this fails, I want to go run this other job instead. So I can build these conditional workflows into my SQL Sentry environment. And what happens when I do this, if I enable this chain and save it, SQL Sentry is going to look for whatever the lead node or nodes are to run. Anything that doesn't have an arrow pointed at it is a lead node. And these could be manually kicked off. They could be a scheduled event. They could be triggered by an execute action in the alerting part of SQL Sentry. So there's a number of different ways this first event could be initiated. Once that happens, the monitoring service sees that run and says, okay, I have a chain for this. So I need to go execute these according to the workflow as the prior jobs or tasks complete. So this gives you quite a bit of capabilities to chain things across platforms, to manage multi-server relationships, to schedule around shared resources. It really gives you quite a bit of power that you don't have in the native toolset. And all of these different products are licensed on a per connection basis. So what we looked at to do what I looked at, what I did today, we were on my reporting services machine, which is watched by Event Manager and Performance Advisor, and this Windows connection is also watched by Event Manager and Performance Advisor for Windows. So I'm using our PowerSuite for SQL Server and PowerSuite for Windows over there. And then on SSDemo 8, I was just using a PowerSuite for SQL Server. Whoops. I just undid a license. Let me put that back. And that's actually kind of important as well. I was able to reclaim and then reuse that license with just a simple mouse click. So if I needed to move licenses around within my environment, I'm certainly free to do that. So if I wanted to stop watching the Windows connection here on London Server 07 and move that over here to SSDemo 8, I could do that. And typically, if I'm only watching if I have a server that's got SQL Server on it and only SQL Server, I get plenty of Windows information from what's provided by Performance Advisor for SQL Server. I will typically only double up, and like I am here on London Server 07, if I have other services running, whether those are things like Microsoft things like your reporting services, integration services, or SharePoint services, or if I'm sharing a server with the app and SQL Server on the same machine. I generally try to avoid doing that, but I do see it from time to time in customer environments, or even here in our environment, we've had a couple places where we've had to do that. And that's where you get quite a bit of benefit from the crossover between the two products. Now, I will very frequently watch a server with both Event Manager for SQL Server and Event Manager for Windows, especially if I'm using Windows Task Scheduler, or if I'm dependent on events from the Windows event log. But Performance Advisor, I'm usually using one or the other unless there's crossover between SQL Server and other services that I may need to watch. So that pretty much sums up everything that I wanted to cover today. Are there any questions? Feel free to either put them in the chat or in the questions pane, or I'm always happy to take them offline. You can email salesengineering@sqlsentry.net, or you can email me directly at sfallen, Fallen, @sqlsentry.net.